All right, but this is week 2 of our Phoneix book club. We're covering chapter 3 of the Phoneix book this week, and still have a lot of traffic and conversation going on the Slack channel, so that's a good indicator that people are still finding this useful. I think this week, once again, we'll go around and just do a quick round of introductions. And Paul, since you're new this week, why don't you kick us off?
Okay, I'm Paul. I work for Thoughtbot in Boston, and I've been doing Elixir for, I don't know, maybe 7 or 8 months. We've done a couple internal projects, and I really like it a lot. And yeah, that's about it.
Did you kind of just opt into those projects, or were they looking for people who are interested?
Oh, so the first one was just like an internal thing that me and a buddy decided to do. We were kind of interested in Elixir and Phoneix, and we wanted to try out some of the real-time stuff. And so he built the React front end, and then I built the back end, which is a JSON API, and then using channels for the real-time updates. And then I built a side project of my own in Phoneix without any real-time stuff, just like HTML, to see how that was, and it was pretty awesome.
Sweet. Are you guys doing any client work yet in Elixir?
Not yet, but I'm hoping we will soon. We've got so part of the criteria is that we have enough developers that we can switch off to people if we need to, and we're kind of getting to that point. Like more and more people are getting excited and realize that they can get started really quickly, and once they use it and see how fast their test suite runs and the microsecond response times, they're like, oh, hey, this is pretty cool. So we're getting to that point.
Cool. That's good. That's good to know, because you guys also use Haskell for a lot of internal stuff, right?
Yeah, we did a little bit. I think that actually has helped the adoption of Elixir, because people got into Haskell because it's all this functional cool stuff, but the barrier to entry is just so high, and the tooling is lacking. And so then people tried Elixir, they're like, oh, hey, this is cool. It's got pattern matching, except I get it. So it has these similar concepts, but it's easy to grasp. And the tooling is just there. It just works. And it's similar enough to Rails that a Rails developer can just look at an existing application and get started within a day or two, but still have all these cool functional programming things. And so it's been pretty good in that sense.
Sweet. Well, I think you're probably the person with the most Phoneix experience. That's going to be in the book club right now, so cool. I hope you're used to being the resident expert, because probably we'll lean on you for a lot of the questions tonight.
All right.
All right, Zach, you want to jump in?
Sure. I'm Zach. I work at MX with Michael here. Just interested in Rails has been really my only web experience, so I'm interested in learning something new. So here I am.
All right. So I'm Michael. I work at MX, obviously, so I used to be really into Erlang. Built a couple of kind of prototype systems in Erlang. Just always really loved the ideas there, but never really stuck around more than just doing hobby stuff. Mostly, I don't really know what held me back. Certainly just overall experience level. I was more comfortable with the tools I knew. And then I think also the tooling, obviously because of the shared history between Jose and Rails, a lot of the tooling feels more familiar and comfortable under Elixir, which makes me feel a lot less afraid about writing a production app in Elixir. And so when I started playing around with Elixir again, then I kind of found all the stuff that I had loved from Erlang, but also found it a little bit easier to grasp, probably because of the intervening 4 years of general development experience. But all of a sudden modeling things concurrently and modeling state as a concurrent but asynchronous part of your application felt really natural at this point. Because I've just had to battle with the times that it doesn't get modeled that way in my existing languages and tools. So that's kind of what brought me here. And then just as I was exploring and reading a few books, I thought, hey, Phoneix is a easy place for people to jump into Elixir. Maybe I can get something going and find some other people who are interested in about this. So that's what got this book club started. And then Dave, you want to finish us off with intros?
Yeah, so I'm Dave Hackett. I got into this really when I tweeted out about a really awesome GitHub stack for Mike on his repo when I said, hey, I'm looking at this Elixir repo for Mike. And then he's like, hey, you want to join this book club I'm putting together? I was like, heck yeah. So I've been doing some, this last week I've been doing some exercises on Exorcism. We'll kind of build up my Elixir foo, I guess, whatever you want to call that. And had a lot of fun. Kind of reminds me, there's a guy I worked with, he's moved to Denver working with Rally, but he's huge into Clojure, like way into Clojure. And so he's always like talking about how thinking about things functionally is just amazing and all sorts of like. It's been kind of nice because I get Elixir way more than I get Clojure or a Lisp, so it's really nice that way. So yeah, that's kind of what's got me into learning, so just reading a book and kind of getting excited about it.
Cool. All right, well, let's jump in then to the content from Chapter 3. So if I'm remembering right, Chapter 3 is kind of all about the controller part of the stack, kind of the controller view and template part of the Phoneix framework. So let's open it up for questions. Who ran into a question during this week?
So maybe for me, reading the chapter, it was more so a question I had before the chapter that the chapter answered. I always wondered in Phoneix, like, why is there a views folder and a templates folder? Like, that's weird and that's different. I thought this chapter did a good job of answering that, like that views is literally just a module to hold functions, and your template is actually just a function call that happens in your view, and it just happens to build HTML in a tuple instead of a string, which I thought was interesting. But so I guess I answered my own question when I read the chapter.
Yeah, because that came up last week too. Some of us were asking kind of what's the purpose of the view. So I'm curious, Paul, when you've done some JSON APIs with Phoneix, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Do you usually use like a function in the view to render the JSON?
Yeah. So like, when you use HTML, you don't really need to define a function. It kind of just calls the right template for you automatically. But when you're rendering JSON, you define a render function, and you say like what the template is. So it would be like render index.json, and then you can pattern match on the assigns from the connection, and then you just return a map. Or it doesn't even have to be a map. It can technically be like anything encodable by Poison for JSON, which would typically be a map, but it could be like a struct. And so from within there, you can just build up a map however you want. So you can take like any number of maps or structs and then put it together into like a map. So you can remove fields or add fields or, massage the different values, like, I don't know, lowercase m or whatever else you need to do in the view.
And then when you return a map from that, how does it know that you intended that to be encoded as JSON?
Because so if you look in your router, it has like I think it's like an API pipeline that says accepts JSON or something like that. I don't remember off the top of my head. But
Okay,
that comes by default in your router.
This thing right here.
Yeah, And so that's going to say that this should accept JSON and it's going to give JSON back. And so it'll try to encode that with poison.
Cool. So that actually brings up a question I had at the end of this chapter, which is, when they broke out kind of the pipeline of the functions that get called, it was like you start with the connection, it goes to your endpoint, which goes to your router, and picks the right controller and action, and then dispatches to that, and your action then calls review, which uses the compiled template as a function. But I didn't see in there really at what step is it looking at the content type headers and trying to decide how to decode the params, because I did a little exercise where I just made an HTML form and I sent it in, and it just gets represented as like a map of keys and values, where the keys and values are strings, but I didn't really understand how it knew to do that, or at what point in Phoneix is that happening. Is that something that would be easy for me to patch into, for instance, and say, oh, if the content type is application protocol buffers, then let me use this protobuf decoder or something like that?
Yeah. So as far as I know, and I think that this is the case, when you use that accepts plug, that's what's like setting like a value on the connection, saying, like, so we could probably pull that up. I haven't actually looked at that part of the plug documentation. But let's see. Or maybe that's even in Phoneix, I'm not sure. Because Phoneix defines some of their own plugs as well. But yeah, you would just define a plug if you wanted to do that, and do whatever you need to do. So plugs in Phoneix are like really important. It's kind of like rack middleware in Rails, except you actually use it because it's so easy to use. And like it's easy to understand where things are coming from, and it just fits into like a functional flow. So you could create your own plug there that says, okay, this needs to be protobuf or whatever. You can set a key on the connection, and then that key would be on your connection all the way through the whole stack. Because all it is, it's just passing a connection through each layer over and over and over and over again. So as long as you set whatever values you need in the plug, you'll have that all the way down to the bottom. I don't know if that really answers your question, but you could just stick that in the API pipeline, or you could create a different pipeline like protobuf pipeline that does whatever you need to do to set up a protobuf type connection.
Yeah, hang on one second. Let me just share my screen.
Mm-hmm.
When you said that, I just was looking through plug and through Phoneix, and
Mm-hmm.
from what I could find, oh man, Inception video feeds. So this is so this is the Phoneix hex docs, and when I looked at the sets, the function it looks like lives in Phoneix controller, and but it does look like it's basically so it looks like it allows it to either be used as just like a function or as a plug. And it has some documentation here on custom media types, which obviously in 30 seconds I haven't totally read and understood, but it looks like it does have some pretty decent bindings into being able to provide specific MIME types. I'm also curious, though, I mean, for accept, that's mostly about setting how I should encode the response. But not necessarily how I should parse the input. So I mean, I'm sure it's probably just another plug somewhere in the set of plugs. Is there like a mixed task or anything to just say like, show me all the plugs that are currently configured in my app?
Not that I know of. That sounds
Okay.
like a good idea, but I don't know how that would work, and I'm fairly certain that doesn't exist now. I would say that's probably a plug. Like you would have plug accept protobuf and then plug like decode. protobuf, which would then set a map on your connection, or however you want to handle that. And one thing you said you could use it as a plug or as a function or something like that. So one cool thing about the way plug works is that you can just define a function. So if you look at the accepts plug, it's just a function where the connection is the first attribute. So that's like how plug works. If you were to go into your router and do plug my cool plug, whatever you want to call it, you could define a function in your router called that accepts a connection and returns a connection, and it would work.
That's pretty cool. Because the first documentation that I saw in the plug README looked like you defined a module with a specifically named function. Is that like you can do an either or kind of a thing?
Right. Yeah. So you could, for instance, like if you were doing an authentication library, you might want to have like a module because it might do a little bit more. Like you might call a couple private functions. So like
Yeah.
I just define a function in the module if it's just like one function that I'm using in like one controller, or maybe, and I never do it once it starts calling like another private function. I'll usually extract it because it's kind of getting too big.
Mm-hmm.
But for littler stuff, like for instance, you could do one of the things I'm doing in one of my apps is like ensure ownership is the plug, so it would be like plug ensure ownership, and it would look at the resource that's on that connection, check if the current user can use it or not, and if they can, it just returns the connection, and if they can't, it redirects. So that's like one way that it's kind of like a before filter in Rails.
Yeah. Sweet. Good thing Paul's on the call tonight.
Yeah, that was very helpful.
Good. I'm glad.
All right. Anyone else have questions from Chapter 3? Or I guess anything about Phoneix, probably?
I thought this chapter is actually pretty simple. I mean, especially the controller actions, like the index and the show, that they gave as an example, were very straightforward. Even compared to like if you just run like a gen HTML on a model and then you look at what Phoneix will generate, it's like it does way more than what they picked, like the two simplest functions that you could do in your controller. So I was kind of doing like a little compare and contrast and digging around earlier, so I found that at least valuable for me. But
Is Gen HTML... Oh, go ahead, Dave.
Oh, I was just going to say how I really liked how they made it pretty clear, like, hey, we're not going to have you use generators to start off. We're going to have you do it the old-fashioned way so that you can appreciate hard work and all the stuff that all the lines you get from college professors saying, yeah, we're going to make you write your own web server and you're going to have to make it threaded because you need to appreciate how difficult it is to use the real thing or whatever. But I actually liked that in this particular case because it wasn't too hard. Like Zach was saying, it wasn't. It was pretty simple, but I liked that. So because it helped me personally when I was trying to just figure out, okay. And then they'd like go through, and then like, you run these functions in IEX, and you can see the output and how really it's just out this Elixir collection, and not just a string like what normally happens. Normally in quotes from like any other web framework where, hey, the HTML is just this string we're going to spit out at whoever. But they did it really intelligently, I thought, and it was good that they pointed that out. That like they exposed that to the reader, I thought.
yeah, I liked as well that you could run your server with almost like you can run Rails server and Rails console together in the same thing with the IEX-S, and then you run your mix command. I found that very helpful to be like, oh, help, where is this like render function coming from? Oh, that lives in the Phoneix controller, or what does this other function do? Like, I could just type H whatever I wanted, and it would tell me. So I liked that while I was running the web server as well. I didn't have to have like two terminals opened or something.
Yeah, I think that is like kind of one of my favorite things about working on an Elixir-based application, whether Phoneix or not. It's just the fact that because you kind of so you start off with the assumption that you are making an application that runs concurrently with other applications. And you kind of define some dependencies so that things start in the right order, but that because you kind of design your applications that way, it makes it so that having a shell and a web server running at the same time is like, it's an easy extension to make. It's not like something, it's not a monumental effort that has to be made by the maintainers to support that, because the reality is that Phoneix is just one more application running at the same time, and the IEX shell is just another application running, and so they can easily run in the same context. So that seemed really cool to me, and I also found it useful, and specifically much more useful than like putting a binding.pry inside of a controller in Rails. Like having actually just like a full shell that has access to all the running processes seemed really helpful. And also, have you used the observer Erlang module yet, Zach?
I haven't. What is it?
Gosh, now I'm gonna have to try to explain it. It's really cool.
I can look it up. I'll put it in my notes.
It's a UI that basically visualizes all the running processes in your Erlang VM.
Oh,
so
I think I have
you
seen
can
that.
start it. Yeah, there's a couple of good tutorials out there for it, but I did it the other day when I was I was making that game server that runs AI games, and I was like, I'm pretty sure if I call this thing this way, that actually is spawning another process under the hood, but I wasn't sure, so I just started up Observer and then hit that endpoint several times, and I could like see my graph of processes, or like the supervision graph, basically like spin off a new node and then it would disappear, and that was super cool to kind of be able to see the state of all the objects in my system kind of interacting.
That is cool.
Yeah, it's really easy to use too. Like if you just started up IEX right now in a terminal, you can just type :observer.start and it'll pop up.
Yeah. So I found that really useful, and I've heard from some people with more Erlang experience that is really useful also when you're starting to try to diagnose bottlenecks, because you can like each of those processes keeps track of how many like tail recursive calls they've made, basically how many iterations of that process have happened, and that makes it really easy to see which of your processes are hot or getting called all the time. And then those are ones that are likely suspects if you wanted to break them apart or optimize the code that's happening in there to avoid that bottleneck. All right, anyone else have questions? I have one other one that I was thinking of just this evening. At work I was looking at a piece of code that we have in production, and in our Rails router, or our Rails routes rather, we have this place where we branch. We basically have, here's this set of routes for version 1, and here's a set of routes for version 2 of this API, and it's doing that branching based on a header, which just made me realize that I don't really know which things you can and can't branch on in the Phoneix router.
Yeah, that's
Have you guys ever tried to like?
Yeah, I don't know how you do that exactly. I think there's a macro in the Phoneix router that lets you just like forward a route to like a different router or a different module. So like rather than actually sending it to a controller, you just send it to somewhere else. So within that, you could just check the connection headers and then put a controller and put an action on it. But I don't know if that's the best way to do it.
Yeah, and I mean, my suspicion here, so going back to kind of here's the router in the Rumble project so far. Stop highlighting. So my guess, just based on kind of seeing the rest of the philosophy behind Phoneix, is that I would bet that these get and post calls are all, and even these scope calls, I would bet that these are all probably just macros that generate a function, and that function is doing some pattern matching on the connection or on the connection struct. And so that makes me think that you can probably branch on anything that's part of the connection struct, including headers or whatever. I just hadn't actually seen it done and haven't figured out how to do it yet, so I didn't know if that was if that assumption is accurate. That just seemed like the first thing I would guess based on how they've organized all the rest of Phoneix.
Yeah, I'm fairly certain that's right, that it just generates a bunch of functions that it pattern matches on, but I have no idea how it actually does it under the hood. I looked briefly just to like see how scope worked, and I was like, I don't need to know this. This is too complicated right now. But I know enough to say that, yeah, you're right. That is what it does somehow.
Yeah, and I've heard, I think it was, I don't remember if it was Jose or Chris McCord, but I'm pretty sure I've heard one of them say that by the time you compile your Phoneix app, the whole routing is just done as pattern matching, which makes me think that it must just be a bunch of just generating function clauses.
Yeah.
But I'll add a note to myself.
Oh, sorry. I was going to say that's how it's like so fast, because the pattern matching in the Erlang VM is like ridiculously fast. So, like I think early on they were doing a little bit more without pattern matching, and it's like a lot slower. So that's why they ended up doing what you said.
Sweet. So did anyone else run into questions this week or things they thought were cool in Phoneix?
I really liked
right.
the. I was thinking about the how they went through the section where they're like, okay, let's create some users, and okay, instead of doing a database, let's do these repositories. I was like, oh, that's really neat. I really liked that because it was like it made me think of similarly to fixtures in a Rails app, but being able to say, we haven't gone over it yet, but how they're trying to convince you, okay, we can do this, and then it'll be an easy swap out for a database, like ridiculously easy is what it feels like. And so I thought that was really cool, where they're like, let's just make this dummy data right now so you can worry, but it's magic.
Yeah, that was kind of my favorite thing about them choosing to not start with the generators is I just think trying to like see, I don't know, trying to see it the layer of abstraction one layer below what you normally interact with has always been a good way for me to have like some sense of good guess about, oh, Phoneix I think is probably doing this here or there. Like usually I only start to understand that stuff if I actually try to look at how they implement one layer below. Not necessarily understanding like all of Cowboy and all that stuff, but just understanding how they implement things or what the generator is trying to generate usually gives me a much better idea of how to debug or troubleshoot things. So I really liked that they started there, and both with skipping generators, but then also with just saying like, let's just not do any ecto stuff right now. We'll just start with hard-coded values. So did anyone else do anything with their app other than kind of the code that was mentioned in the chapter? So I kind of just wanted to try to do like one thing beyond what they mentioned directly in the chapter, just as a way to kind of sanity check, like, am I really actually following this stuff or not? Because so I like that they're giving you a really good overview of the framework. I feel like they're doing a good job of that, but I don't know, I never really love it when books give you like, here's the exact code to type into your buffer, and it will make everything all right. Because it gives me less confidence that I'm really actually understanding what's going on. So at least for me, kind of the thing that I tried to build to convince myself that I'm actually understanding is I added these two routes right here. So I just wanted to implement like the game of life sort of a thing. So if I get /gol, that'll just generate an empty game of life board, and then I can post to that over and over, and it'll keep figuring out the next generation. And the way that ended up working was I actually so I only actually have one template, and my view in this case, my view just has one helper in it, which is just about generating checkboxes correctly, and Paul will probably tell me that I'm doing this totally wrong, because I probably am doing this totally wrong. But my template is just basically a raw form, and I did have to put in the CSRF token in order, because going back, the router browser pipeline has this protect from forgery, which is a CSRF token thing. And so I had to have that there. But the really nice thing is, actually, let me delete this. I'll actually just start this app really quick. And I'll switch to sharing. Just share my full screen for a second. Wow. All right. So if I start this thing up, and I here's my game of life thing, and I can just check some of these checkboxes. So my board is just an array, just a giant table of checkboxes. And if I try to submit this without the CSRF token, look at this beautiful error message you get. It's like, oh hey, this thing isn't there. Make sure all requests include this param or this param. Sorry, this thing in the params or this thing in the headers. And it's like, just totally pushed me in the right direction here. So if I put it back in now, and do this again, make like a little glider here, then I can actually run my game of life, and it'll just keep going and going. So I thought that was a good, it kind of pushed me just a little bit outside of what I had done so far, or kind of what the book had taught me so far, but also reminded me that good error messages are good, because that was a very good error message. All right.
Yeah. Just one cool thing that you guys might like that took me a while to figure out, but once I found out it was awesome, was that, let's see, maybe I'll share my screen real quick. Let's see. Can you see that?
Yeah.
Okay. So IO.inspect, that's have you guys used that before?
Is that if you do inspect inside of an interpolation?
It's so you can do, it just writes whatever the thing is.
It's kind of like if you were to call inspect in Ruby.
Yeah, it's puts whatever dot inspect. It's like doing basically in Ruby.
Okay.
But the coolest difference here is that IO.inspect prints what that value is in a string form, but it returns the original value. So what's cool about that is you don't need to save it to a variable in between or do anything weird. You can stick IO.inspect in the middle of a pipeline, and it'll work. So you don't need to change your code. You can just stick one in the middle, see what the value is, and your code won't blow up. Which is a little thing, but it's actually really handy once you know that. It's
Do you use that pretty frequently when developing your Elixir apps?
Yeah, quite a bit. Because, like, sometimes it's hard. You don't want to just, like, pry all over the place. Instead, I'll just, like, inspect the different values in a chain and what they return. And just see, like, visually, okay, here's what I get back, here's what I get back, here's what I get back. And then you can see where something's going wrong.
Yeah, that does seem super
That seems
valuable.
like it'd be really useful. It's
Yeah,
like
that's super cool.
to put in the middle of your code, like you're debugging or something, and instead of just, let me write 3 or 4 lines, you can just add that right into your pipeline. That's really
That's super cool.
Yeah, especially since in Elixir so much of your code just ends up being like, oh, take in this data and transform it to this, then into this, then into, like, it's just kind of these small steps of transformation that you glue together. And so being able to just, like, if one of them goes wrong, go, let me inspect the value right before that one and see what it looks like. I feel like that's what every Lisp enthusiast has always tried to tell me my whole life about functional programming. But just saying it without the word monad in there is so refreshing.
Yeah.
Say that word.
Huh?
Oh, you don't have to say the word monad, don't worry.
Wait, Garrett, do you have an emoji on your text?
Baby.
I feel like
appropriate for today. I'll let you figure it out.
Every time I hang out with Garrett, I learn about another place that you can put an emoji in a computer.
They're so expensive.
Yeah, they're great. So I guess my notes for this next week are try to understand, however, like the plug. Well, try to see if I can get some sort of visualization of the plugs that make up my application at a given point in time, and then also see how decoding of params works. And my third one is see if I can put emojis into my Phoneix application. I'm guessing I can.
Just need UTF-8. That's it.
Yep. That was one of Jose's big things, was UTF-8. He wanted the computer to be able to output his name correctly.
That does make you wonder because so Jose obviously is a native Brazilian, but Matt is Japanese. So how come the default encoding was like ASCII for so long, or whatever it was in Ruby? No, just saying.
No idea.
it's probably leftover from Matt's like dealing in old school C and Perl and all the other languages. If you've ever heard him talk, like he spoke at BYU in 2006, and he's talking about like, I did stuff with Python and it sucked, and I did stuff with Perl and it sucked, and Lisp, well, that was just awful. And so he's talking about like all these languages that.
Whoa. If we're gonna throw out that he hates Lisp, I'm going to have to stop you right there. Lisp.
No, he doesn't hate Lisp.
Ruby
He didn't say that.
Just saying that.
He just said, all he said was, well, Lisp, if you ever have a problem in Lisp, the way to solve it is with a macro. That's the problems in Lisp. And because that's what you do. You throw a macro at it. And that's hard because you're pleasing something that's not a human. And so like he's talking about like what he wanted in the programming language of his dreams, and so he's talking about Ruby and how Ruby has this idea to please the programmer and not the machine. Not saying that those other languages you are necessarily like just pleasing the machine, but it tends to end up being most of the time like, oh, I have to please the compiler. I can't just like write something that I can read. But yeah, I think it's probably just that particular artifact of Matt's using so many other languages at the time and not really focusing on something like the necessarily the encoding of what your files are going to be. Concerned with like he's been doing tons of programming in English-based programming languages and not so much like worried about writing something that's going to output his name correctly, because he'd probably never done all those images.
Yeah, and that's true because obviously Jose, he branched from a language where there was already UTF-8 encodings, and that battle had been fought, so obviously it was easier, probably a more logical choice for him to just start with that in there rather than trying to add it in afterwards. Probably because he also was, he probably had to do some of the work for supporting those encodings in Rails, and so I'm sure once you felt the pain of adding it in after the fact, you probably just wanted it in there from the start.
I dare anybody to go back 12, 15 years on the Wayback Machine, look for a compiler that will work great with UTF-8, an operating system that works great with UTF-8 out of the box, and then just imagine you have this language that is semantically very pretty, very expressive, and then you're like, oh crap, encoding, what am I going to do? And then solve the problem in that point of view. Then fast forward now and go on GitHub and search UTF-8 and find how many C libraries you find to just like wrap it up for you. The world's changed a lot, so I think, I said laziness as a joke, but I think, if I was 12 or whatever a year ago was, I can't remember now, but to try to write that, I would have been like, no, not going to happen.
Well, plus emoji's a big deal. You gotta support that.
It wasn't really about the E with the accent on it for Jose's name. It was just because he wanted emojis, multicolor emojis for his pull requests.
Yep.
We're gonna be honest.
Sweet. All right. So, okay, last call. Questions or cool things you learned about Elixir this week?
So I thought this was really cool. I was doing one of the exorcism exercises. Like right out the operations or functions that exist for the list module, and try and do it without using any other modules, just like doing patching. So the full one, and I kind of did it first where like I'll just do list comprehension because those you can provide a filter in there and filter. But then as I thought about it over the next day or so, it's like, I wonder if I could just pattern match, because I didn't want to use an if statement. I didn't want to throw if in there, even though I know you can do that. So I thought I want to just pattern match where I pass in true or false, and then pattern match, like if it on my definition, my function definition for true, just return the element, and then for false, just basically a no op. And so I thought, well, try it out. And so I do it, and I was like, this is so neat. I wrote this code that doesn't use an if statement, but it still has this kind of branching logic because it's using pattern matching. And I thought that was really, really neat.
I was lazy about getting on Exorcism this week. I invited several people to a team and then didn't jump on all week. I'll have to get on there because I think that's actually that was the exercise I last worked on, was the kind of re-implementing a bunch of stuff from the list module. And they make you the test cases that they give you for that exercise include okay, let's see if you can concatenate two ginormous lists together, and so we can't always just do it the very easiest way. They put some performance issues in there as well, which I thought was pretty cool. It's a difficult challenge. So I'll try and jump on this week and see if I can contribute a little more to that. That'd be good.
I know I ran into performance issues on that exorcism task, so I had to rewrite it.
Sweet. So that was actually going to be my last question, though, to the group, was kind of what do we think? So how can we make this group really useful to people? Do we think that using Slack a little bit more and just having kind of more informal discussions would be really useful? I think I get a lot of value out of just trying to take whatever's in the chapter and just do the chapter plus one, just add one of anything to try to see if I'm understanding things. But I'm just curious, what do other people feel like is a good way to get some value out of this group?
I like the chats on Slack, and doing the exorcism exercises really helped me. I love concept or your idea of like, hey, let's do this +1 thing. And I thought, okay, I'm going to do that this week. I'm going to try and do a game of life thing when you post that in the exercise channel. And I got like 4 and realized I don't have time for just because of my personal schedule. I was like, crap, I can't do that. So I thought, well, that's on me because I need to do a better job of scheduling and reading the chapter early enough so that I don't think, oh yeah, I can try and do something in like an hour. But I like that idea so that it's kind of a stretch to not just do what the book says, but stretch yourself and try and learn it through experience. I like that.
Any other ideas on making the group more valuable? I mean, I agree with the +1 thing. Like, I like the idea of it, and I got value out of doing it this last week. But finding time for +1 of anything is always kind of rough. I think maybe part of the value of just having a book club overall is just so that I at least have read the chapter and I don't just stop reading this book on chapter 3. And if I'm planning on doing a hangout, then I will actually read chapter 4 and not just be like, Phoneix is super cool, but I'm really busy, so I'm going to put this book down and never read it again. So maybe that's just already the value, or at least part of the value of the group. But I'll also try to jump on Exorcism because I do think that's it's like a really good outlet that doesn't require a lot of time. You don't have to have like an hour and a half or 2 hours of dedicated time. You can just jump on for 5 minutes or 10 minutes and review someone else's code or just put up a small submission of your own. So, all right. Any final thoughts or parting wisdom?
One little thing, I guess, that I thought was interesting. So in chapter 3, you write your own little mini repo. But I really like that they use the repository pattern there because it makes it really easy to extend the repository with custom functionality. So like, there's no like in Rails there's the find or create and first or create and like all these different methods like that. There is no such thing in Ecto right now. So I just added my own get or insert function to the repo, and it was like 3 lines of code. Well, maybe a little more, but it was really easy to do. And if it was something like, an active record, I'd be like, I don't even know how I would go about doing this. Like, you'd probably have to include, yeah, I don't know, but it's just so straightforward and simple to have it right there, which is really cool. So I really like that a lot.
Perfect. I didn't want to cut you off. Jon he's in Slack. He couldn't join the video. I'm his spokesperson. Apparently, he says maybe we could go over like an exercise every other week or something. Like, like Mike did the game of life. Then we all share it, or we pick an exercise and we all share it. I don't know. Is that what you? You can read Slack, and Jon can explain it more.
Yeah, sorry. Actually, dang, I suck at my life because he had like sent me his email address and I sent him an invite, and I just now realized that like 40 minutes ago he said, "Can you resend that invite?" And that I'm like not even reading Slack. Dang it. So we'll see if he wants to jump on, and we can talk about that too. All right. So my ideal situation, I think what would actually be super fun But this is far enough in the future that it makes me feel very uncertain trying to make this happen. But have any of you guys read some or all of Sasha Urich's book, Elixir in Action? So, so I started reading that one because he's pretty prolific in the Erlang community, and he was a name that I remember from back when I was looking into Erlang a long time ago. And then when he announced his book, there was a discount code, so so it was really cheap, and so I got it, and in that book, it's more focusing on the basics of the Elixir language, and things like, you know, trying to get really practical about how would you model this kind of a system in, or this kind of an application in a system where your primitives are actors and processes and supervisors. And so he goes through a whole bunch of stuff, and all the chapters are like, here, like, we'll build this thing together up till here, and then your challenge at the end of the chapter is to be like, okay, now let's assume that this process is too slow, so you now need to load balance against a set of those worker processes. Try to make your application do that. And he has like code examples of some implementations of those, like how you could fulfill those challenges. But each chapter kind of ends on a challenge. And so what I would really love to do is, after this book club, make a book club which would be following Sasha Urich's book, and that way each of us could come at the end of a given chapter with like, oh, okay, here's how far I got on that challenge, or here's my solution to that challenge. I think that'd be like, it would teach me an immense amount about the Elixir language to try to do that and compare notes about how other people solve problems, so that I can see the way they think in terms of Elixir. So that's like my ideal, but like I said, that's, you know, assuming we get to the end of this Phoneix book club and there are still people involved and we haven't all just stopped reading the book, and also assuming that immediately people will be like, hey, wouldn't it be great if we did another book club? Which is a big assumption at the very least. So
this book club may be pretty short if they release part 2 though soon. Just saying.
We'll have an interlude to our book club for another book club.
Yeah, like almost halfway there.
So yeah, so maybe for now we just focus on the simpler things, and then we come back around to it. But yeah, so if anyone else does ever want to post a challenge, I mean, where I'm at personally right now is like I spend most of my evenings either doing work stuff or Elixir stuff. And sometimes I get super burnt out and I don't want to spend a ton of my time, or sometimes it's not super easy for me to make that work because of what my family needs. But right now I just happen to be in a good spot for that. So if anyone does think of challenges or +1 activities that they want to do, just mention it in Slack, because I'm probably game, and I'll probably find an hour or two to make a go of it. So I'll probably go ahead.
Oh, I have one question. Well, this isn't meant to really be answered right now, but it's just kind of over the course of the book club, which is Zach and I are talking today just about how a lot of the Ruby community is kind of running towards the Elixir community, and we were wondering how that's going to influence the Elixir community, because right now Phoneix is really built on a lot of principles that really utilize the Erlang VM and a lot of Erlang fundamentals, but just kind of wondering what's going to happen as more and more Rubyists get involved, and just kind of what do you, after learning Phoneix and playing with Phoneix, plan to take to Ruby, and at the same time, what are the things from Ruby that you wish were in Phoneix, and the patterns in Ruby that you want to see in Phoneix, and then additionally, how many of those patterns can you find like a more idiomatic alternative versus something that you're just like, this doesn't exist, so I want it, if that makes sense.
Time will tell, I guess.
So I don't know. That's what I've been. This is what I've kind of been thinking of, and hope to glean from your very smart thoughts in this group. So,
Jon.
Jon's here.
I'm so sorry for sucking and inviting you.
It's cool. Sorry, totally Gary.
No. Anyways, I'm just looking to see how the influence from the Ruby side converging into Phoneix and what things will come out of it. So it's just kind of a big what's going to happen. Nobody knows, but that's why we explore, I guess.
Dave Thomas last year at the Elixir Conf keynote, and he talked about that. And like, hey, we are people in this industry are let's solve new problems. Let's not do what we've done before. Let's try and solve new things. I thought that was a pretty good challenge that he kind of threw out to the community at the beginning. I watched that last week sometime, and I just thought it was very just like challenging. Like challenge to the community, saying, "Hey, let's go where no man's gone before, and try and solve what haven't been solved before."
Yeah, I'll say at least. So my experience so far has kind of been in the opposite direction in some ways, right? It's so for a long time my day job was PHP, and Ruby was the thing that I was like always trying to tell my bosses, "Oh man, you got to do Ruby. Like this is all this code over here is garbage. Like we should be doing this stuff over here." And so in some ways, like as I picked up Elixir, that was kind of my gut reaction, right? Was to be like, "Oh my gosh, this is faster. Therefore, I should do it instead of Ruby." And I had, and of course I did the thing that like is almost always a bad idea. I like took a small part of our application at work, I rewrote it in Elixir, and did some side-by-side benchmarks, and it was significantly faster. It was like somewhere between 3 and 5 times faster than the Rails equivalent, and that's a Rails code base that has had a lot of optimization work put into it, and so it's a pretty solid code base for comparison. But what was interesting is that when I got to the end of that, and I kind of asked myself the question of like, is this something that my company should do? I didn't think it was, because the cost of changing languages and changing what the primitives that you reach for to solve a problem are, that's a huge cognitive cost, and getting a 3x performance boost is like great, but it's not that amazing. Like hardware is not that expensive, right? And so so that trade-off, it's been interesting to me. But the thing that actually kind of worked for me was that we wanted to implement this new feature on our platform, and I was having a really hard time wrapping my mind around how to make it work. It's basically like snapshotting a bunch of data, but that data lives in different databases that are managed by different services. And so, like, how do we make the snapshot work? How do we make it somewhat fast, and have it happening concurrently, but still have some sense of like being able to stop it in the middle and some of these kinds of basic controls and backflow in the system? And so thinking about that in terms of Rails and objects was like I wasn't getting anywhere. And then I realized that that each of my Rails apps was like a process, and all of a sudden I was like, oh, this thing that I did the other day, like I had just done some example problems where I had to synchronize between a few asynchronous actors in an Erlang system or in an Elixir system, and the patterns that I had kind of been experimenting with there totally applied in this other distributed system. And so for me, the learning has kind of gone the opposite way. It's like, if I can think about a problem and assume that what if these were the set of primitives that I had available for solving that problem, that made me think about the problem differently, but I was able to take that different solution and then pull it back over into Ruby and Rails and say, what if I could augment my existing system with this type of a pattern? It's not completed yet, but our initial look into it is looking really good, and I think we're going to give it a shot. So for me, it's actually kind of in the opposite, right? It's not really what does the influx of Ruby developers and Rails developers do to the Elixir community. It's It's like, what did Elixir do to my brain?
Okay, that was I listened to the Ruby Rogues episode today, and they were talking about like how do you make the decision or what do you do to bring in a new technology or a tool or and it was really interesting, especially like we're going through that process in my company right now. Like we're evaluating, you know, what we're using Cold Fusion right now, CFML, and we're just saying, well, the community's dying, the tool set is awful, there's just like no support, we're kind of drowning in our own system, and so we're kind of going through this process right now, and it was just really insightful. And they just said, you know, sometimes you just have to, like Michael was saying, is this right? Is it the right thing to do? So I kind of feel like, you know, if you're not that I'm working in a Rails app or anything, but you know, when you're in that environment, when you're in your company's environment, you just have to really wonder, like, should I change my thinking or should I change my tool? And I like how Michael said it affected my brain, and that kind of thing was like, you should try Elixir, not because in his keynote he was saying you should try Elixir not because it's going to be the silver bullet, not because it's, you know, like this is the language that you should start using. That's not what he's saying at all. He's saying it will teach you to think differently, and hopefully, I think that's like one of the biggest takeaways that I've had so far is it me to think differently when I'm thinking about, like, oh, how could I solve this problem in a different way? Is there a different approach I could take at this? And hopefully, I would hope that more programmers take that approach, like go be like Dave Thomas and Michael Ries, where let it affect your brain instead of I need to put this new shiny system. Hopefully that would be the takeaway.
But that was sacrilege to use my name next to Dave Thomas. Just to clarify, that was a pretty terrible sin that you just committed. All right, so I mean, I've said final call too many times on this call, but any other things that people want to point out, something you learned from this week or a question you have? All right, sounds like everyone's good. So I guess we'll wrap up the call for today. Thanks everyone for jumping in, and hopefully we'll continue to have a good book club for next week. So thanks everyone for being here, and we'll see you all next week.
Yeah.
Thanks.
See you guys.
Bye.
See you guys.